Hi there, my name is Martin Donahoe. I am one of the grad students in this class, and I'll be talking about an article that I did for this video and the written critique called Mr. You're Writing in Spanglish, Fostering Spaces for Meaning, Making, and Metalinguistic Connections Through Teacher Translanguaging, Shifts in the Bilingual Classroom. It is by Kathryn I. Henderson and Mitch Ingram. For this study that they did, it focused on a third grade bilingual teacher in a urban, fairly heavy Spanish-speaking environment in Texas. To find the teacher who they used the pseudonym Michael Smith for, they did quite a few surveys and interview processes that kind of narrowed down their focus on what kind of teacher they wanted to observe for this. Specifically, they wanted one who was bilingual, who had some experience and was effective. Michael Smith had 13 years of experience, and he seems to have been kind of a maverick in his school, at least according to the authors, Henderson and Ingram. He basically defied his district's sort of policy on bilingualism in the classroom and decided just to have this more translanguaging approach, which is defined as the language and meaning-making practices of bilinguals, and subsequently multiple scholars have engaged and extended the concept of translanguaging to emphasize different theoretical perspectives, including linguistic and meaning-making processes, identity and cultural practices, and multilingualism. So it's kind of this sort of unique approach, especially to bilingualism, which in the context of like how Michael defined his district, school district only wanted certain subjects to be taught in Spanish and then others to be taught solely in English. So what Michael decided to do, and kind of the basis of this translanguage approach, was that he had three sort of abilities as far as stance, designed, and shifts. Stance is basically sort of what his ideological sort of view is on everything, and according to the article, Michael had a very welcoming and community building sort of view and basis for why he decided to defy the district, which seems kind of silly in a regard that you'd only be able to teach certain subjects and certain words or in a certain language at any given moment. So that brings us to a second factor of Michael's ability, which is constantly referred to as his high level of multilingual awareness, in that based on the observations, he had several shifts, which is another factor, as far as he could go from Spanish to English, and then also different varieties of Spanish in a moment's notice, especially in some of the activities he did, where he would do songs or tell jokes for his class. He did a lot of other activities, and this goes to a third factor of his ability, which is design, which is kind of what he's planned out. But based on the observations, he did most of his shifts or switching from English to Spanish or vice versa incredibly quickly. So they found all this data and looked at it. They observed him for an extended period of time and found that he did a lot of revoicing, where he would sort of reinterpret what students were saying or just say back to them what they had said. Some mirroring shifts where he would, it says mimic, and I'm not sure if that's he's mimicking sort of the class's language or word choice as a whole, or mimicking their voices, which seems strange. Where he would kind of give a lesson and say, oh, well, if I don't listen, then this will be due soon, and then I won't know where it is. And then, so he would kind of imitate that sort of student speech. He would also give formulaic expressions as far as like very succinct and concise sort of language and terms, especially in a lot of call and response that he did, that he would go from English and the students would speak Spanish or vice versa. So all of this kind of gives into his translingual shift, and according to other researchers mentioned in the article, there are 6 understandings that bilingual teachers must have to demonstrate a high degree of critical multilingual awareness. And that's 1, knowledge of languages, proficiency, user domain; 2, knowledge about the 2 languages, subject matter knowledge and analyst domain; 3, pedagogical practice in the 2 languages, the teaching domain of the language; 4, understandings of plurilingualism and its value for a democratic society; and 5, understandings of the histories of colonial and imperialistic oppression; and finally 6, understandings of language as a social construction. And according to the observers, Michael engaged in the classroom as a bilingual, embodying and modeling bilingualism as a resource for learning, interaction, and relationship building. His language practices contrast sharply with bilingual teachers who strictly separate their language or even feign not knowing the language. And after reading that, I was very surprised that you would have bilingual teachers that must have some of these qualities, at least the teaching domain ones, but the feigning of not knowing the language I found very surprising. Um, and it showed that a lot of Michael's pedagogical purposes ended up being more about creating a community of his classroom, and this really helped students find their voice and speak more often and speak more clearly. But what the article addresses, and kind of huge criticism of it in sort of a whole, is 1, yes, Michael acknowledged his own native English speaker and white sort of place of power within his classroom, that he's able to get away with doing this translanguaging shift in his own class, but he does concede that other teachers, say of different ethnicities and different genders, probably would not get away with it. And 2, the study did not measure the academic success of the students at all, or saw if this actually helped their academic goals. But as far as like laying the groundwork, and this is by the researchers, as far as using this observational data for how they can kind of emulate Michael's apparently superhuman teaching ability, is really good. It's a very interesting read, and it definitely explores sort of the need for this, and it's kind of the first building block of a really concise and sufficient translanguage classroom. In that, yeah, more research can be done, but this is sort of starting at the basis, which is how do students feel in the class, and what do they get out of a teacher that doesn't stick to one language or the other, or prioritize one or the other, but continually shifts into either one constantly throughout the lesson. Thanks.